Does art imitate life or life imitate art? For Sandfall Interactive, both statements ring true in the world of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, an RPG that has won the praise, respect, hearts, and awards of gamers and critics alike by incorporating, executing, and delivering on multiple elements inspired by Japanese RPGs at such a high quality that makes this French RPG a unique gaming experience that after 60 hours of playtime, I ain't gonna lie, it's worth being Game of the Year. With this game being my last review for the year of 2025, come with me on this spoiler spree of my review for Expedition 33. I went into Expedition 33 with no idea what to expect. All I remembered about the game was the trailer when it was first shown during one of Microsoft's showcases, but it was enough to capture my attention before I joined the rest of social media in saying, "Ooh la la, looks like a French Final Fantasy." Despite taking major influences from Japanese RPGs, this game hones those influences through a French perspective, specifically with the cinematic direction this game takes for an RPG. Using motion capture actors to capture even the most subtle of movements and facial expressions during these cutscenes where characters are talking to each other and sometimes talking over each other, and sometimes not talking at all as they allow for the emotion of the scene itself to do the speaking that mimics how these interactions would happen in real life. Also being unafraid to really push the boundaries of being artsy-fartsy within the cutscenes, on top of the heavy use of letterboxing, aka these black bars at the top and bottom, the cinematic vibes intensifying due to me choosing to play the game in the French dub, which I do not regret because the French actors do just as much of a phenomenal job as the English voice actors do.
Je ne m'attendais pas à ce que ce soit comme ça ici.
Pas étonnant. Mais... tu vas bien?
Mourir ici, c'est pas comme à Lumière, pas vrai? Je croyais être habituée à perdre des proches. La vie d'un enfant adoptif, hein?
And also, it helps knowing that I don't hear Ben Starr in my ears, therefore eliminating me from annoying myself every time I'm watching a cutscene by going, Ben Starr is talking. Oh my god, shut up. It's Jennifer English. That's Shadowheart. She's bae. Everything from the dialogue, to the narrative, to the theme, to the gameplay is raw, unsimplified, mature, and respectful in taking into account the player's intellect to follow the game's story and navigate through the game without being babied. At one point, I got so enthralled in exploring around the map solving side quests, or to find merchants, or a mime who's just chilling, hanging out, so we can slay both literally and fashionably. It reminded me of when I played Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. Just a humble wanderer in the middle of a fully realized world with barely any explanation of what the hell is going on. All that's expected and all that's required from me as the player is taking the world in, discovering and accepting the lore and workings of how the continent has shaped itself, and exploring the many unknowns I came across during my playthrough. The feeling amplified for me at the first foray into the overworld map, where you can generally travel to your heart's content to find a plethora of locations, some of them expanding upon the lore, hosting collectibles and upgrades, and some of them making you parkour for your life, but hey, at least you get to see that thumb. For a game with decent modern day graphics and an intriguing art style where the characters' abnormal, large heads and thin body frames resemble dolls, the impression Expedition 33 left me with was nostalgic and whimsical, embarking upon a journey, getting to know and developing a bond with my party members, finding expedition logs of previous expeditioners imparting journal entries of their journeys to the monolith, their final remarks encouraging us to keep going forward on our path to defeat the Paintress. There can exist a fine line where one can argue this game might have some bloat to it. But I have to say, not once while playing Expedition 33 did I feel like my time was wasted, nor did it feel like any of the extra content I decided to engage in bloated the game. It feels like it's attributed to how the game and its story unfolds. The story for this game is like an onion. You start off barely knowing anything about this world other than reaching the paintress so you can crack her upside the head. The further you progress towards her, the more and more layers of the story peels until you reach its monolithic core. At the same time, you can't help but start off confused because you're traveling within uncharted territory. As I traveled towards the monolith, some of the locations required to traverse there were so strange from what's usually expected that I eventually got the vibe that there's more to this painter's character and there definitely had to be more to this world. But still, I had not a clue. For every time the game answered a question I may have had in the back of my head, 3 more questions would pop up in curiosity. That's when the game shines with using its locations, enemy designs, and dialogue to drop clues on what the real story is and who these mysterious characters outside of our initial expedition group are. What began as defeating the paintress ends as us caught between family drama due to the death of a child. The flip in this narrative had me shook once the game reveals there are actually 2 stories running parallel to each other. The first one being the expedition was fake and everything takes place inside of a painted world inside of a canvas. The expeditioners and the townspeople of Lumiere, all constructed by Aline de Sonde, who infiltrated into the world of her deceased son's canvas, and the super spooky Gromage, created by her husband, Renard de Sonde. This warring wife and husband, with the powers of creating living beings and worlds with the power of painting, also created the bleak cycle that is the start and the catalyst of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, or well, if you really want to get technical, all the expeditions. Now that the curtains have been pulled back on the Wiz, the second story exposes how 2 parents turned the last reminder of their deceased son they had left from a child's fantastical world of a playground filled with heroes, wonder, and adventure, into a war zone full of martyrs, dread, and a fool's errand. Influenced primarily by how the members of the Sonde family choose to handle, or rather in this case, mishandle, their individual grief. Instead of doing what any healthy family would do, which is come together, grieve together, and heal together, the Sonde family are at one another's throats. The decisions guided by trauma and selfishness, including Alicia for the Mayel can do no wrong brigade. It showcases how grief and trauma can take people to one hell of a dark place when it's left unchecked and, worst of all, unhealed. How trauma and grief can split a family apart quicker than it can strengthen the bonds of a family. This family is everything but perfect, and that's the beauty of this narrative. In relation to the family dynamics within the Sonde family, none of them are heroes. Yes, you heard me correctly. None of them are heroes. Not even Alicia for you Mayel did nothing wrong believers. At the same time, nor are any of them villains. They're all flawed individuals who, within their own goals and in the best of their own intentions, believe themselves to take the right course of action, and whichever family member decides to block them from that path is a villain in their eyes, furthering this cycle of a dysfunctional family that will never begin the process to heal until they finally decide to move past the subject of their grief. So in other words, you know which ending I picked. And I don't need your judgment because Luna is already judging me. However, you want to know who really deserves the title and honor of being heroes within the story though? Every expeditioner dead and alive, including and especially CL, Lune, and Gustav. They're the only characters I deem worthy of the title of heroes within the entire narrative due to how they were created. Human amalgamations of Aline's imaginations that didn't ask to be here at all, let alone ask to be thrown in the middle of the Desonde's bullshit. They exist simply because Aline exists, and we're now venturing to save their town from their creator and her husband, who decided to make their problems everyone's problems. Save their town from their creators. Technically, they're defeating God. Well, I'll be a Duolingo Al. This game really is a French version of a Japanese RPG. Now, great writing with a compelling story is pretty typical for an RPG, especially one that's influenced by Japanese RPGs. But another element that must be delivered is the combat, and I have to say, Expedition 33 fired on all cylinders in this department. Expedition 33 contains the usual suspect of having a leveling system where you can obtain a set amount amount of points to allocate amongst every character's attributes. And don't worry, they did not forget about a skill tree either, where you can unlock multiple abilities as you rack up skill points with each level. The biggest contribution to how fun you can have fighting in this game is the character building system. From choosing a variety of Pictoses, which turns into Lumina when you obtain full mastery of these skills, that can be added to your character at a price of Lumina points that you can assign to your characters, to a lineup of equipable weapons and more skills. Again, how godly you want a character or characters to be in this game is entirely in your hands. It was intimidating at first since the choices seemed endless, like a fat kid being locked inside a candy shop, but I eventually opted for a Verso Revive build using Contorso, where with auto death and a second chance, we'd be brought back to life, buffing the other party members upon death with max AP, powerful and shell, and debuffing the enemies with burn procs, their break bar full, and to put the cherry on top with a free aim break shot Lumina, so as soon as Verso hits an enemy, they become stunned, Verso's rank automatically retrieves S, and I can use a particular S rank ability at a rank required discount to break the other enemies, making them all silly putty in my hands. At least they would have continued to be until the developers decided to release the thank you update that nerfs breaking death. It's a crock of shit. And a recent pain in the ass with RPGs nowadays, where somehow I'm punished for wanting to be a god because motherfuckers love complaining about difficulty nowadays. Like, there's difficulty levels and a challenge section in this game where you can modify the enemies to have exponentially bigger health bars and attack power. What's the fucking point of nerfing skills in a single player game? Not a multiplayer game, a single player game. No PvP. It's stupid. Rant done. I haven't even touched the surface with what other Pictoses and Luminas can be put on the other members to optimize their respective builds. The gist is you can choose to micromanage each member to be the best they can be individually, considering that every member in your party each offers something unique in terms of their fighting style that you cannot get from any of the other members, while also being unique versions of the typical JRPG fighting archetypes that you usually find in these games. Or you can choose one member like I did to be the anchor of the party. Or if you're built different from the rest of us, you can even make a solo build if you prefer to have just one person within a party. Now, you might think with how easy it is to be that OP in this game, then that downgrades the game's difficulty. Do not worry, it does not, as by endgame, there are multiple dangerous areas where stronger enemies and super bosses resides, rewards you with crafting materials to upgrade your weapons to higher levels, especially around the maximum level, which is 33, better Pictos, or free level upgrade for Pictoses you already owned, or a free upgrade for a weapon you already own. So don't forget, make sure to work on your parrying and dodges, because some of these enemies definitely have some mechanics to them that is pretty fun to figure out, or in the case of the Gross Tete, yeah, you better have your parrying on point. Another aspect that can easily go overlooked and underappreciated when it comes to RPGs is world building and level design. Granted, as usual that the world or levels accents the game's story, but in the case of Expedition 33, the worlds and levels don't just accent the story, they are a part of the story itself. The level designs put the show into show don't tell when it comes to this game, as the level designs tell both the fantastical world of Verso's imagination, since it's the Gastrals being these wooden doll-like fabled heroes that have a paintbrush for hair, and they have a childlike playfulness to them. Their only concerns being the best fighter they can be. So running through Gastral Village and talking to the villagers there is pretty amusing and funny. On the opposite side, if Gastral Village is childlike and playful, Visage is a location painted by Renoir that represents his observation of Verso suppressing his emotions and never revealing his true feelings, as his entire location and its enemies are all ornamented with masks. The distinct lighting within each section of this location also different colors to emphasize the highlighted emotion within that section. Yellow for joy, blue for sadness, and red for anger, you know. And then you have with the overall lore of the continent, where Verso's remaining legacy has been tampered with by Renoir and Aline's fighting, which causes the world inside the canvas to fracture, which means some locations are only accessible via flying. Even the enemy designs aid in telling a story through dialogue descriptions and tags given to them, like the 4 axons produced by Renoir and how they represent each Descenda family member, and are essentially Renoir's artistic interpretation of how he views each family member. It's this high level of detail when it comes to committing to telling a story that you can't help but commend when a game has this much cohesion. And the impressive part is that this cohesion still does not stop here. The music, the music genuinely speaks for itself with 8 hours of beautiful and tragically orchestral sounds, with the occasional experimental track that's gonna give you either an accordion or a synthesizer of some sorts. And then there's this certified banger that sounds like we're in the middle of a club in Amsterdam buying LSD off a chick named Stacy. Is it laced? We don't know. Just get to licking. The soundtrack for this game assists greatly in carrying the emotional weight of each character, the dynamics between characters, of each scene, and of each trek you embark upon in the midst of completing a dungeon. Primarily featuring the piano, strings, and guitar as composed by Lorraine Testard, but not limited to these 3 instruments, as well as occasionally the vocals of Alice Dupont-Percier. The music reminds me of Nier, where the usage of heavy reverb gives the feeling of remembrance, isolation, remembering a time where this world once flourished as it was originally created before grief and strife entered the chat. The strings mourning what was once lost, and the piano when used, you can't help but think about Verso. Even listening to the soundtrack seems like the kind of music Verso would create if he got to follow his desire to be a pianist rather than a painter. The Nier comparison ages quite well after looking up the lyrics of some of the songs, and thanks to one fan heralding their own translation of the soundtrack, the lyrics are comprised of a made-up language that incorporates French, Latin, and Spanish, so the Nier influence is definitely there when it comes to the music. Again, this game, I fear it has me in its clutches. Now, as much as I have showered Clair Obscur with nothing but praise in this video, there are some issues I have when it comes to this game. I played the game on PC, so there were moments of jankiness, unfortunately. Even trying to get the game to work on borderless Windows was giving me a hard time. Sometimes as I explored through locations, there were slight hitches that felt like the frames dipped for a second or two before picking back up. There were also times while fighting that my buttons were not registering all of a sudden. Of course, I'm not one to arrogantly assume that I'm some kind of video game god that can make no mistakes. Like, some of the enemies in this game have been curb stomping me. But here's a clip of me fighting a boss in the game, and watch what's happening as it's attacking Mael. As you can see, I'm clearly parrying each and every hit, except for this one right here, while continuing on to parry the rest of the combo, including getting the gradient counter off to counter the gradient attack. And here's how I know that my button input was not being registered, because I wouldn't care about getting hit because I pressed the parry button too early. The parry animation didn't even activate, like it's not even a failed attempt at a parry. And my game froze. Yeah, I mean, it happened after over, 60 hours, but still, I'm using a 5070 Ti to play this, not a fucking easy bake oven. I'm just gonna chalk it up to it being an Unreal Engine game, and when it comes to Unreal Engine, yeah, I prefer if a game did not use Unreal Engine. I also wasn't a big fan of the fact that flight enemies are highly resistant to ground attacks, even when they're stunned. Granted, there is a possibility to make contact with them using a physical attack, but the possibility is very low, so you're left with shooting them to death, which can be a bit time consuming if it's a flying boss monster. It would have been nice if creating a free aim shot gives these particular enemies a grounded status of some sort, or perhaps there might exist a Pictos that allows for flight enemies to be physically attacked, and I just haven't found it yet. I can say the good within Clair Obscur Expedition 33 overshadows the flaws, as this RPG embodies the spirit of multiple Japanese RPGs that came before it, where behind the thrill of adventure lies a dark, brutally honest reality of a bigger threat or challenge to overcome in order to restore balance. Is Clair Obscur Expedition 33 a revolutionary game? It's not. However, I think the reason why so many people gravitate to the game is because of how close to home and how universal its topic and theme hits. Protecting and holding onto our humanity against a harsh, brutal world that grows worse by the minute, cherishing every second granted by life as death waits around every corner, ready to collect at any given time. We have all lost loved ones. We have all experienced grief. We have seen how grief can change people. We have seen how death can weaken family bonds. Still, tomorrow comes, and as those of us who have come after, all we can do is continue to live on for the ones who are no longer here. But Expedition 33 isn't the first RPG to shine a light on dealing with death and grief. I recommend checking out my review of Final Fantasy X-2 that you can click on right now, where its lighthearted tone in comparison to its famous predecessor strengthens the life and death narrative both games structure themselves around, and how X-2's initial narrative is both Yuna and Spirit's attempt to live on in a world now freed from sin's reincarnation. Until 2026 though, stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy the holiday season. Peace.